He was running from the law. She was running from her tribe. Their paths crossed amid stormy mountains, where the wind howled like a living creature. They sought refuge and found an old castle standing above the clouds. But inside, the walls whispered, and the shadows remembered those who had once lived there. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from. The wind came down from the high ridges like a living thing, carrying dust and the faint scent of snow. The sky had turned to pewter, low and restless, and the land stretched outward in long waves of grass and stone. A man rode through that desolate country, bent slightly forward in the saddle, as if trying to hide from the horizon itself. His name was Sam Hayden. The horse beneath him was old, a scarred mustang with one clouded eye, and both man and beast looked as if they had been on the road for 100 years. Sam's coat was torn at the shoulder, his hat rimmed dark with sweat. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days. The only sounds were the squeak of the saddle and the wind whispering through the sagebrush. He knew he was being hunted, though he didn't bother to look back anymore. He'd once worn the gray of the South and later the dust of the frontier. But when the war had turned to slaughter and the orders came to burn a camp of Apache families, women, children, old men, he had refused. A man could obey many things, but not that. For that disobedience, he had been branded a traitor, and the same army that had once fed him now sent riders to bring him down. The sun fell behind the ridges, and with it came a memory he never managed to silence, the smell of gunpowder and pine, his wife's face as pale as the moon the night the fever took her, the small hand of his son going cold in his own. There were ghosts in every shadow of the trail, and the farther he rode, the closer they followed. He wasn't heading anywhere in particular, just west, away from the sound of men's voices. He thought maybe if he reached the mountains, the world would forget his name. The first drops of rain began to fall when he saw her. It was near a narrow creek that twisted between boulders. At first, he thought it was an animal drinking at the water's edge, but then she lifted her head, and the light of the dying day caught the curve of her cheek. A young woman, barefoot, her dark hair braided with feathers, now heavy from the rain. Her clothes were torn, her arms streaked with blood. She turned when she sensed him, knife in hand, eyes like polished obsidian. He didn't draw his gun. He only sat there on the horse, staring. The rain hissed on the rocks between them. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she ran. He swore under his breath and spurred the mustang after her, not out of pity, but instinct. She stumbled once, her wounded arm failing her, and when she fell into the mud, he caught up. She slashed at him with the knife, but she was too weak. He took the blade gently from her fingers and saw the fear in her eyes. Behind them, from somewhere down the trail, came the echo of men shouting. "Quiet," he whispered. She didn't understand his words, but she recognized the warning. Together they moved up the ridge, slipping behind a curtain of rocks, just as a group of riders appeared below. 2 soldiers and several Apache warriors. The woman froze. Sam looked down at the mixture of blue and brown faces and knew what it meant. She was being hunted by her own kind, and was. The riders searched a while, their torches flickering in the rain, but the storm thickened and drove them back. When the noise faded, Sam built a small fire beneath an overhang, enough to warm their hands. He tore a strip from his shirt and bound her arm. She winced, but did not pull away. "What's your name?" he asked. She watched the fire instead of him. "Naya," she said finally, her voice rough, uncertain in English. The words sounded like the wind itself. He nodded. "Sam." That night, they didn't speak again. The fire sputtered and died, leaving them in the hollow dark of the mountains. The rain became a storm, hammering down until the earth turned to water. In the flashes of lightning, he saw her face, the shadow of exhaustion beneath her eyes, the stubbornness of someone who had already lost everything and still refused to die. By dawn, they were on the move again. The path climbed higher, the air thinning with every step. Sam's horse slipped twice on the slick stones, and when it finally gave out, he left it behind. Naya moved ahead without complaint, her bare feet silent on the wet earth. She said little, but he noticed she always glanced toward the sky before choosing a direction, as though listening to something unseen. When he asked how she knew where to go, she said, "The mountain speaks. You just don't hear it yet." He didn't answer. He'd long stopped believing in things that spoke back. By midday, they reached a narrow pass where the wind howled like a living beast. Snow began to fall fine, silver threads that vanished as soon as they touched the ground. Sam was thinking about finding shelter when Naya stopped. Ahead, beyond a curtain of mist, something loomed. At first, he thought it was a cluster of dead trees. Then the fog shifted, and he saw the outline of a house. Massive, wooden, weathered by decades of storms. A mansion, here of all places, perched on the spine of the mountains. Its roof sagged, its walls swallowed by ivy, yet parts of it still stood proud against the wind. A wooden sign hung crooked above the gate, the letters nearly erased by time. Homestead Aldrich, 1825. Sam pushed open the gate. The hinges screamed like something alive. The courtyard was covered in wet leaves and broken branches. He helped Naya up the steps, and together they stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and old smoke. Their footsteps echoed through a long hallway lined with portraits. Faces of people long gone stared down at them. Stern men, women in bonnets, a child holding a book. Some paintings had been slashed or blackened by soot. Furniture lay overturned. Yet the place had a strange stillness, not of abandonment, but of waiting. In one of the rooms, they found a hearth still half filled with ashes. Sam gathered splinters and lit a fire. The flames licked upward, painting the walls in gold. Naya sat close to the warmth, her hair drying in dark waves. She traced the carvings on the mantel with her fingers. Sun, water, and snake symbols, faint but deliberate. "Your people made these?" he asked. She shook her head. "Old ones. Before my tribe. Before yours." He didn't know whether to believe her, but something about the carvings stirred an unease in him. The house felt too alive. Somewhere above, a shutter banged, though no wind came through. As the fire settled, he explored the lower rooms. In the cellar, he found shelves lined with jars, long turned to dust, and, in one corner, a chest sealed with rusted iron. Inside were bundles of paper letters, diaries, written in careful ink that had faded to brown. The last one bore the date 1825 and a name, Eleanor Aldrich. He read aloud a fragment by the flickering light. "We built our house above the wind, where judgment cannot climb. If the world forgets us, let it be so. The mountain remembers." The words hung in the air. Naya's eyes reflected the flame, and for the first time, he saw not a stranger, but someone as lost as himself. Two exiles in a house that seemed meant for them. They ate little that night, jerked meat from his pack, and rainwater caught in a tin cup. Outside, the storm raged harder, battering the roof until it seemed the mountains would swallow them whole. Yet the house did not fall. Its timbers creaked, but the walls held firm, like the ribs of some great animal protecting them. When Naya finally slept, Sam sat by the window. Through the cracks in the shutters, lightning flashed across the valley, illuminating endless ridges. He wondered who the Aldriches had been, what had driven them to build a mansion in this wilderness. The diary pages whispered faintly when the wind touched them, and he thought he heard voices, soft, distant, speaking words he couldn't understand. He turned back to the fire. The warmth seeped into his bones, and for the first time in years he felt something close to peace. The thunder rolled farther away. The woman breathed evenly beside the hearth. Outside, the storm began to ease. Before lying down, he whispered without knowing why, "We're still alive." In his sleep, he dreamed of hands carving wood, of a woman's laughter echoing through empty halls, of sunlight pouring through a window that no longer existed. When he woke, the house was quiet. The wind had stilled. The dawn poured through the cracks of the ruined shutters, soft and golden. For the first time in a long time, Sam Hayden felt as if he had reached the edge of the world and found something that might be called home. The valley below lay drowned in mist, but above them the mountains shone. He stood at the threshold of the great house, breathing in the sharp, clean air. The sign on the gate creaked in the breeze. Homestead Aldrich. He looked back at Naya, who stood barefoot in the doorway, her face turned toward the rising sun. The light caught in her hair like fire. He nodded to her silently. Behind them, deep within the old house, something shifted, a groan of timber, almost a sigh. It felt less like decay and more like awakening. The wind rose again, gentle this time, curling through the hallways and whispering through the open door, as if greeting the new souls that had come to live beneath its roof. And the house, patient through decades of silence, seemed to breathe once more. The dawn that broke over the mountains was pale and silent. A thin mist drifted through the trees, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile calm that felt almost sacred. Sam stepped outside, the wooden steps creaking beneath his boots. The wind brushed his face, soft and cold, carrying the distant cry of an eagle. Below him stretched a valley drowned in fog, endless and white, as if the world itself had been erased during the night. Behind him, the old house stood against the brightening sky, its roof glistening with dew, its windows catching the first light. He turned when he heard the door open. Naya stood on the threshold barefoot, her dark hair loose over her shoulders. The faint warmth of the rising sun painted her skin in gold. She didn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, as though she saw something he could not. Sam followed her gaze and saw only clouds drifting over the ridges. "The storm's gone," he said quietly. "It sleeps," she answered, her voice soft but steady. Mountains never forget. Her words lingered in the air, strange and heavy with meaning. He didn't know whether she was talking about the weather or about something deeper. They spent the morning exploring what they had come to think of, almost without saying it, as their refuge. In daylight, the house looked different, less haunted, more alive. Dust motes drifted in the sunbeams that cut through the broken shutters. The wood of the walls was warm and honey-colored beneath the layers of soot. Naya moved through the rooms, as if walking through a memory, her fingers tracing every carving, every crack in the timber. Sam followed, taking note of the structure, the age of the boards, the way the foundation still held despite decades of storms. Whoever had built this place had known how to make wood endure. In the main hall, they found an old mirror, its surface spotted with silver decay. When Sam lifted it upright, it caught their reflections together. Two strangers who might as well have been ghosts. Behind the mirror hung a faded tapestry of a river winding through mountains that looked much like the ones around them. They worked in silence most of the day. Sam repaired the hearth, dragging stones from the outer wall to patch the cracks. Naya gathered dry grass and bark from the edge of the forest, humming under her breath, an old song whose rhythm matched the wind. The melody seemed to fill the house with warmth. When she spoke of her people, she used words he didn't know, but he understood the tone, half sorrow, half reverence. By evening, the house smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. They sat together by the fire, eating what little food they had left. The flames reflected in her eyes, and Sam found himself wondering who she had been before all this, what her life had looked like among her people, what she had left behind. He wanted to ask, but something held him back. Instead, she spoke first. "This place," she said quietly, "it breathes. It waits for us." He looked around at the flickering shadows, the creak of the timbers, the faint sigh that seemed to echo through the halls. It was easy to imagine the house listening. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it just remembers too much." Later that night, while she slept, he went through the chest of letters again. The handwriting was elegant, careful, written by someone educated. The name Eleanor Aldrich appeared again and again. One line caught his eye. "My husband says the wind speaks of forgiveness. I am not sure I believe him, but it is easier to breathe when I pretend it does." He read it twice, his lips moving silently. The ink had bled in some places, as if touched by rain long ago. In another corner of the chest lay a wooden carving, no bigger than his hand, shaped like a circle with 4 lines crossing through its center. It reminded him of the marks on the mantel. Naya stirred in her sleep, murmuring something in her language, and he put the carving back carefully, feeling as if he had touched something private. The next day the air was colder. Clouds gathered again over the peaks, but the wind was gentle, as if exhausted. They decided to make the house livable. Sam set about fixing the collapsed stair railing, using nails he salvaged from broken furniture. Naya swept the floors, collecting bits of glass and bone. In one room, beneath a thick carpet of dust, she found small wooden toys, hand-carved horses, and a doll missing one arm. The sight of them made her smile faintly. She lined them up on the windowsill facing the light, as if giving them back their place in the world. At midday, they discovered a narrow passage behind a fallen bookshelf. The space beyond led into a smaller chamber lined with shelves of books eaten by insects. But on one of the walls, beneath the peeling paint, were carvings, again, sun, serpent, water, and a spiral that looked like the movement of wind. Naya touched them reverently. "Old ones," she whispered, "like stories my grandmother told." "About what?" he asked. "About people who crossed the line between tribes," she said. "When the world was new, there were no borders. But when men began to draw them, love became a crime." He watched her for a long moment, the firelight from their lantern dancing over her face. He didn't know what to say, but her words stayed with him. Days passed in quiet rhythm. They found a pattern in the solitude work, food, silence, the steady pulse of the mountains. Sam began to sleep without waking in terror. The nightmares came less often, though when they did, they left him shaken. Naya learned to read some of the letters with his help, her eyes moving slowly over the foreign script. She laughed when he corrected her pronunciation. It was a small, rare sound, and he realized how much he had missed laughter. But beneath the calm, there was something else, an unease neither spoke of. At night the wind returned, rising through the chimney like breath. Sometimes, faintly, they heard footsteps in the upper rooms where no one walked. Once, Naya found a door open that she had closed herself. Another night, Sam woke to see the fire burning higher than it should have, though no one had touched it. He began to think the house did remember in some wordless way, and that the memories it kept were not all peaceful. One evening he told her about the war. The words came slowly, broken by silence. He told her how he had followed orders until he could no longer bear it, how he had seen the smoke of the Apache camp rising like a black wave against the dawn, and had turned his horse away instead of joining the massacre. He expected her to be angry, but she only listened, her eyes distant, reflecting the fire. "My father said every man has two hearts," she said after a while. "One made by his people, and one made by the earth. The second is the one that saves him when the first forgets who he is." The room grew very quiet. Outside, snow began to fall again, the flakes brushing against the windows like whispers. That night, unable to sleep, Sam climbed the stairs to the upper floor. The boards creaked under his boots. In the small attic at the end of the corridor, he found an old painting, half covered by a sheet. He pulled the cloth away and froze. The portrait showed a man in frontier clothes, and beside him, a woman with dark skin, her hair braided, her hand resting gently in his. Behind them, the mountains stretched endlessly. Beneath the frame, carved into the wood, were the words, "For those who will come after us." He stared at it for a long time. The faces were calm, serene, yet the brushstrokes carried something defiant, something that refused to be erased. He felt Naya's presence behind him before she spoke. "They lived here," she said softly. He nodded. "And died here, maybe. They built this house between two worlds," she said. "Like we did." He didn't answer. The thought frightened him more than he wanted to admit. The days that followed brought an early thaw. The snow melted from the roof, dripping into the gutters like a slow heartbeat. Sam ventured farther down the mountain for firewood and found signs of others, hoof prints, a burnt-out campfire, scraps of cloth caught on thorns. He didn't tell Naya at first, but she already knew. The mountains had gone quiet in a way that meant danger. That night, they both heard it. The echo of distant voices, faint but unmistakable. The sound carried through the wind, followed by a dog's bark and the clatter of horseshoes against stone. "They're coming," Sam said. "For you?" she asked. "For both of us." He began checking his rifle, counting what ammunition he had left. Only a few cartridges. The idea of fighting again filled him with dread. But there was no choice. Naya took a small pouch from her satchel and sprinkled ash around the doorway, drawing a circle with her finger. Then she pressed the carving of the 4 directions against the wood above the frame. "What's that?" he asked. "A sign to confuse the spirits," she said. "Maybe it will confuse men, too." He almost smiled. "Can't hurt." By the time darkness fell, the first torches were visible far down in the valley. The flickering lights moved slowly upward, winding like a trail of fire through the forest. Sam loaded his rifle, but Naya stopped him. "If we kill," she said, "the mountain will remember that too." "Then what do we do?" "We wait." The wind began to rise again, moaning through the chimney, shaking the shutters. The firelight danced wildly across the walls. Sam stood at the window, watching the torches multiply. Naya sat by the hearth, her head bowed, whispering something he couldn't hear. The air felt charged, heavy, as if the house itself was listening. When the first drops of rain began to fall again, he thought of the night they had found the place, how the storm had sheltered them then. Maybe it would do so again. "Whatever happens," he said, "we stay together." She looked up and met his eyes. "Together," she repeated. Outside, the thunder rolled across the ridges. The lights below flickered, wavered, and then vanished into the blackness as the storm swallowed the path. The wind roared louder, battering the walls until every beam in the house groaned. Sam thought he heard a low voice beneath the sound, rising from the floors, from the very wood around them, a hum like the beating of a heart. The carvings on the mantel seemed to shimmer in the firelight. Naya closed her eyes, whispering to the air. He didn't know if it was prayer or spell, but as the storm climbed the mountain, the fear that had haunted him since the war began to fade. The house, once strange and empty, felt suddenly alive, watching, protecting, remembering. When he finally lay down beside the hearth, the wind howling like a living creature above the roof, he felt Naya's hand find his in the dark. And through the roar of the storm came a softer sound, one he hadn't heard in years. The steady rhythm of peace breathing through the walls of the old house that had waited so long to be found. The storm that had risen in the night had not yet broken when the first flashes of lightning tore through the clouds, illuminating the great house like a ship caught at sea. The wind screamed through the cracks in the walls, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine. Sam stood by the window, watching the faint glow of torches in the valley below flicker and vanish again behind the sheets of rain. The mountain was alive with sound, the deep rumble of thunder, the moaning of trees bending under the gale, the rasp of shutters trembling on their hinges. Every gust felt like a hand pressing against the house, testing its strength. Naya sat near the hearth, her hair unbound, the firelight playing over her face. She was murmuring softly, her voice almost lost to the storm. Sam could not tell if she was praying or speaking to the wind itself. The circle she had drawn in ash around the doorway was still visible, the lines faintly glowing orange from the reflection of the flames. The carved talisman above the frame swayed with each gust, knocking gently against the wood. "They're close," Sam said. Naya looked up, her eyes dark and calm. The mountain knows. It will decide what happens tonight. He checked the rifle again, though he knew it was a useless gesture. Against so many men, it would not matter. The ammunition was low, the wood damp. Yet his hands moved with a soldier's habit, loading and checking as if routine itself could keep fear at bay. He thought of the painting upstairs, the man and woman standing together before the same mountains. Their faces had not shown defiance or terror, but a quiet acceptance, a peace that came from understanding that survival was no longer the only purpose. The first shouts came not long after, voices carried faintly through the wind, mixed with the whinny of horses. Sam's pulse quickened. The torches moved higher, weaving through the dark like fireflies born of hatred. He stepped back from the window. "They found the path," he said. Naya rose and came to stand beside him. She looked out through the broken glass, then reached for his hand. Her fingers were cold, but steady. "Let the house remember us kindly," she whispered. The words unsettled him. "What does that mean?" "It means we belong to it now, as those before us did." He wanted to argue, but something in her tone silenced him. The fire behind them flared suddenly, as though fed by unseen breath. Sparks rose up the chimney. The wind outside shifted, turning from a howl to a deep, rhythmic pulse, like the beating of an enormous heart. The men reached the lower trail, their torches glimmering faintly through the storm. Sam could make out the shapes of horses, figures moving among the trees. He thought he heard a voice call his name. Another lightning strike split the sky, and for an instant the valley was white as bone. Then came the sound of rocks tumbling somewhere far below, a noise so deep it seemed to shake the foundations of the house itself. "The path," Naya said quietly. "It's breaking." He strained to listen, and over the wind, he heard it, the groan of stone collapsing, the dull crash of boulders falling into the ravine. When the thunder rolled again, the torches below flickered and disappeared, swallowed by the dark. For a moment neither of them moved. The air in the room felt charged, electric, as if the walls were breathing with them. Sam stepped away from the window, lowering the rifle. The fear that had gripped him since the first sight of the lights now drained from his chest, replaced by something larger and quieter. "They're gone?" he asked. "The mountain sent them away," she said. "It remembers who listens and who does not." The storm raged for hours, a relentless choir of wind and water. The roof groaned but held. Once, a tree fell near the house, shaking the floorboards, but the walls did not yield. They sat side by side before the fire, their faces lit by its orange glow, their shadows dancing along the walls. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. The fear that had bound them was gone, and in its place came a stillness so deep it felt eternal. Sometime before dawn, the thunder faded to a low murmur. The rain softened, falling now in slow, heavy drops. Sam drifted in and out of sleep, his head resting against the wall. When he woke, the light of early morning was seeping through the cracks in the shutters. The air was clear and sharp, washed clean by the storm. He stepped outside. The world was white with frost. The valley below was blanketed in mist, and the peaks shone with new snow. The silence was immense, so complete that even the smallest sound, his breath, the creak of the steps, felt like an intrusion. He looked down the slope where the path had been. It was gone. The earth had fallen away during the night, leaving only a sheer drop where once there had been a trail. The mountain had closed its doors. Naya joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. They stood together for a long time, watching the mist drift like smoke over the valley. "What now?" she asked. "We live," he said simply. But even as he said it, he knew they couldn't stay forever. The food was nearly gone, and winter was coming fast. The house had given them shelter, but it was also a tomb of memories. He felt its weight pressing on them, urging them to move on, to carry its story somewhere new. They packed what little they had, a few tools, dried herbs, the diary pages, and one of the small carvings Naya had found. Before leaving, Sam went to the wall beside the hearth. He took his knife and began to carve into the wood. The words came slowly, each letter cut deep. "This house belongs to those the world cast out, who built their place beneath the sky." When he finished, he stepped back. The sentence looked rough and uneven, but it felt right. Naya came to stand beside him. She placed a single feather, the same kind she had once carried in her hair, on the mantle above the inscription. Then she lit the last fire they would ever make there. The flames rose gently, filling the room with warmth. Smoke curled upward, drifting toward the broken beams of the ceiling. When they stepped outside, the wind stirred again, soft and cold. The trees gleamed with moisture, their branches heavy with frost. Sam looked back once. The house stood silent, its windows reflecting the morning light. It no longer looked abandoned. It looked eternal. They walked down the slope until the fog swallowed them. Behind them, unseen, the fire burned low, then settled into embers. The mountain watched, as mountains do, unmoving and ancient. Years later, those who came to settle the valleys below would speak of the old house on the ridge. Hunters swore they saw lights flickering there on stormy nights, and travelers told of hearing laughter carried on the wind. Some said the spirits of the man and woman still guarded the mountain, turning away those who came with anger in their hearts. Others claimed the house itself was alive, built from wood that remembered love stronger than death. A century passed. Snow buried the roof, moss crept over the beams, and the forest grew thicker around it. The name on the gate Aldrich was long gone, the letters eaten by rust. One summer afternoon, a young settler climbing the ridge stumbled upon the ruins. Only part of the main hall still stood. Inside, half hidden beneath the vines, he found the carved words on the wall and the feather resting in the hearth, untouched by time. When he reached to pick it up, a breeze swept through the room. Dust lifted from the floorboards, swirling in a golden spiral. For an instant, The faint scent of smoke and cedar filled the air. The young man stepped back, heart pounding, but the air was gentle, not menacing. It felt like a greeting. He replaced the feather exactly where it had been and left the house as he had found it. As he walked down the mountain, he thought he heard footsteps following light, distant, in rhythm with his own. When he turned, there was nothing but the sound of wind through the trees. That night, back in the valley, he told the story of the house to those who would listen. He said it was a place that had outlived sorrow and war, that the walls still whispered the voices of two souls who had once defied the world together. Some laughed, but others crossed themselves and looked toward the mountains, uneasy. And high above, where the air was thin and the clouds drifted like ghosts, the old house stood unmoved. In the fading light of evening, the wind rose again, curling through the broken shutters, over the carvings, through the halls that had once known love and fear and peace. It breathed softly, as if in memory, and for one brief moment, two shadows seemed to stand upon the porch, the shape of a man and a woman, hand in hand, looking out over the valley that had finally forgotten their names. The mountains kept their secret. The house above the wind slept on, eternal and awake, a sanctuary for all who would someday come seeking shelter from the noise of the world, and a monument to those who once dared to build their home between the storms. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next one, and share this video with someone who still believes that love and memory can outlast the storm.